My stepmother told a boardroom, "You're a house guest, and house guests don't vote." By sunrise, I owned every bolt of my grandfather's company, 54%. That was the number folded inside a sealed envelope in a safe deposit box in Prescott, 90 miles north, while my stepmother stood at the head of my grandfather's conference table and told 11 people I didn't belong in the room. "Let's be clear, Delia," Gina said, tapping one lacquered nail on the walnut. The nail was the color of a fresh bruise. "You're not a shareholder. You're a house guest. And house guests don't vote." Somebody laughed, a short, wet cough of a laugh from Laurel, her daughter, at the far end of the table. The air conditioning hummed at 68 degrees. The room smelled like scorched coffee and the lily perfume Gina bought by the case. And beyond the glass, the July sun had already flattened the parking lot into one white sheet of glare. I have my grandfather's thermos in my hands, his dented green Stanley, 41 years old, the enamel worn down to raw steel where his thumb used to sit. I set it on the table very gently so it wouldn't make a sound. She thought she had just closed a door on me. She had no idea she'd handed me the key. What none of the 11 of them understood, not Gina, not Laurel, not the 2 lawyers she'd flown in from Denver at $400 an hour, was that the quiet woman they'd spent 4 years treating like a piece of leftover furniture had been holding the deed to the whole house the entire time. I wasn't fighting to get into Evercrest Holdings. I already owned it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the number only matters if you understand the man behind it, and the girl who used to sit on his knee at that same walnut table when her feet didn't reach the floor. My name is Delia Ashford. I was 36 years old the summer this happened, and for most of my life, I was the least important person named Ashford in the state of Arizona. My grandfather, Walter Ashford, started Evercrest Holdings in 1971 with $4,000, a used cement mixer, and a 2-bay yard in Peoria that flooded every monsoon season. He poured foundations, then driveways. Then, when Phoenix started swallowing the desert whole in the 80s, he poured the pads under half the strip malls between Glendale and Mesa. By the time I was old enough to ride shotgun in his F-250, Evercrest had 3 plants, 61 trucks, and a name that meant something to every general contractor in Maricopa County. Walter never wore a suit that wasn't a funeral or a bank meeting. He drank his coffee black out of that green thermos, and he told me, more times than I can count, "Delia girl, a company is just a promise you keep to people who show up. That's all." Don't ever let anybody dress it up as more than that. I was his only grandchild. My father, Thomas, was his only son. My mother, Ruth, died when I was 14, ovarian cancer, 11 months from the diagnosis to the funeral. She'd been a middle school science teacher for 19 years, and the thing she left me wasn't money. It was a sentence. She used to say it when I got a bad grade, when a boy was cruel, when the world tilted. Keep your voice low and your paperwork perfect, and you'll never have to shout to be believed. I didn't understand it at 14. I understand it now. I did not go into the family business. That was a decision people misread for the next 20 years, and it was the smartest thing I ever did. I loved the yards and the trucks, but I loved drawing more. So I went to the University of Arizona, then to a 5-year architecture program, and I became a licensed architect. I spent 11 years at a firm in Scottsdale designing municipal libraries and water treatment facilities. Unglamorous, structural, permanent work. I made $92,000 a year and drove a 2016 Honda CR-V with 140,000 miles on it. I rented a 1-bedroom near Camelback and kept a jade plant alive on the windowsill for 9 years. That was my life. Quiet, precise, mine. My father remarried in the fall of 2019. Her name was Gina Vance, and I want to be fair to the woman I met that first Thanksgiving, because the person she became makes the earlier version hard to believe. She was 51, elegant, a former commercial real estate broker with a laugh that filled a room and a way of remembering that you took your coffee with oat milk. She brought a pecan pie and her daughter Laurel, who was 29 and worked, vaguely, in marketing. My father had been a widower for 11 years. He was 63 and lonely, and when Gina looked at him, he stood up straighter. I was glad. I want that on the record. For about 2 years, I was genuinely glad. The good years were real. Gina redecorated the old house in Paradise Valley, and it looked wonderful. She threw my father a surprise 65th birthday party with 40 guests and a jazz trio, and it was warm and generous, and I cried a little. She called me on my birthday. She sent me a scarf from Nordstrom that I still, God help me, own. If she had simply been my father's wife, I would have loved her until the day I died. But there was the company. There was always the company. Here is the thing about Evercrest that nobody in that boardroom in July had bothered to understand, and it is the whole spine of this story, so I'll say it plainly, the way my mother taught me. When my grandfather Walter died in 2011, he did not leave the company to my father. He left my father control of it, the CEO chair, the salary, the run of the place, but he put the ownership somewhere else. Walter had watched 3 of his friends' companies get carved up by second wives and in-laws and creditors, and he was a stubborn old man who trusted blood and paperwork in that order. So he wrote a will, and he built a trust, and he left the controlling block of Evercrest stock, 54% of it, to me, to his granddaughter, not to be touched, not to vote, not to even be spoken about, until my father either stepped down or died. I want to be honest about how strange that was to carry. I was 21 when he did it. He sat me down at that same walnut table, slid a manila folder across it, and said, "You're going to own this someday, whether you pour concrete or draw pictures, but you're going to keep quiet about it, and you're going to earn your own money so nobody can ever say you're waiting on a dead man. Understand?" I understood. For 15 years, I kept quiet. My own father knew. He'd signed as a witness. But we almost never spoke of it because it only mattered on the day he was gone, and neither of us wanted that day. The lawyer who drafted it, Paula Okonkwo, was 34 then and just starting out. She's 59 now, and she is the best friend I have on this earth. So that was the seed. That was the card in my hand that no one could see. Now let me tell you how it almost got taken. My father was diagnosed in January 2023, pancreatic, stage 3. He fought it hard for 15 months, and I drove up to Paradise Valley every weekend, and for a while, Gina and I were something close to allies, taking shifts, comparing notes from the oncologist, splitting the drive to the Mayo Clinic on Shea Boulevard. Grief made a temporary bridge between us. But somewhere in that 15 months, the small wrong notes started, and once I noticed the first one, I couldn't stop noticing the rest. The first was the phone. My father, weak from a chemo round, asked Gina to bring him the Delgado numbers, meaning the quarterly figures on a job the company was running out in Buckeye. She said she'd handle it and turned her phone face down on the counter, and something in the smooth speed of it snagged on me like a nail on silk. I filed it away. My mother's daughter, I filed everything away. The second was Laurel's title. In March, with no announcement, Laurel Vance, Gina's daughter, the woman who was vaguely in marketing, appeared on the Evercrest org chart as Vice President of Strategic Operations. I found out because I still got the internal newsletter, a 4-page PDF the office manager, Sylvia, had emailed to families since 2009. Laurel had never poured a foundation, never priced a load of aggregate, never stood in a yard at 5 a.m. in her life. Her salary, I learned much later, was $185,000. The third was the office. My grandfather's office, Walter's office, then my father's, the corner room with the topographical map of Maricopa County on the wall, and his first business license framed above the desk, got refreshed. That was Gina's word. She spent $240,000 of company money on a renovation. Gray velvet, brass fixtures, an abstract painting the size of a garage door. The topo map went into a supply closet. The business license, the $4,000 promise from 1971, I found later in a box in the parking garage storage cage, the glass cracked corner to corner. The fourth I'll never forget. It was a Tuesday in April, 3 weeks before my father died. I came up early to sit with him, and I heard Gina in the hall on the phone, not knowing I was there. "Once Tom's gone," she said, in the light, efficient voice she used for closings, "the company's mine to run how I want. Delia won't be a problem. She draws little libraries." She doesn't understand any of this, and frankly, she never has. I stood in that hallway with a warm ginger ale sweating in my hand, and I did not make a sound. I went in and sat with my father and held his hand while he slept, and watched an old episode of Wheel of Fortune with the volume low because he liked the sound of it. I said nothing. My mother was right. I didn't need to shout. I needed my paperwork perfect. My father died on the 9th of May, 2024, at 4:20 in the morning, at home, with both of us in the room. Whatever Gina became, she was there for that, and I won't take it from her. For about a week, we were two women who had loved the same dying man. Then the machine started, and she came at me like I was a lien to be cleared. The funeral was on a Saturday. The following Wednesday, Gina called a family meeting at the house and had one of the Denver lawyers on speaker. She told me, in the gray velvet living room, that Thomas's will left his interest in Evercrest to her, that she would be stepping in as chair and interim CEO, and that the board, a 5-person board she had quietly reshaped over the previous year, had already voted to confirm her. She slid a document across the coffee table, a severance offer. In exchange for my cooperation and goodwill, and for signing away any claims, real or perceived, to Evercrest Holdings, Gina Ashford would personally pay me $2,200,000. She actually smiled when she said the number, like she was doing me a kindness, like 2.2 was a generous price for a granddaughter's silence. "Your father wanted you taken care of," she said, "but he wanted the company in professional hands. You have 30 days. And here is where I have to tell you the truth about myself, the ice-cold truth, because it's the hinge of everything. I did not cry in that room. I did not raise my voice or slam the folder down or tell her what I knew. Something in me had gone very still and very clear, the way the air goes right before a monsoon, when the birds stop and the light turns green. I looked at the offer. I looked at her lacquered nails on my grandfather's estate, and I thought, with a calm that frightened me a little, she doesn't know. She genuinely doesn't know what she's standing on. Because Thomas's will could not give Gina his interest in Evercrest. Thomas had never owned a controlling interest in Evercrest. He'd owned 19% and the CEO chair. The other 54, the block that decided everything, the block that could seat and unseat a board with a single vote, had belonged to me since 2011. It was sitting in a trust that, by the exact language my grandfather and Paula had written 13 years earlier, converted to my direct, unrestricted voting control the moment my father died. It had converted at 4:20 in the morning on the 9th of May, while I held his hand. Gina had spent a year building a throne on top of a trap door, and she just handed me the lever and told me I had 30 days to use it. I took the folder. I said I would think about it. I drove back to Scottsdale doing exactly the speed limit the whole way, and when I got home, I called Paula Okonkwo, and I said 4 words. "Paula, it's time," quietly. What followed was 6 weeks I am not ashamed of. There was no violence in it, no screaming, no revenge in the way people mean the word. There was only paperwork, done perfectly, in the dark, until it was ready to be done in the light. Paula and I met in her office in Tempe, a modest suite over a Vietnamese restaurant, so the whole floor smelled like lemongrass and star anise by noon, which is a detail I loved and which I'll always associate with the best work of my life. We pulled the original trust instrument, the 2011 will, the stock ledger, and the certificate itself, the physical stock certificate, number 001, for the controlling block, which had been sitting in that Prescott safe deposit box for 13 years. Paula confirmed in writing what we already knew. On my father's death, I held 54% of the voting shares of Evercrest Holdings, free and clear, no trigger, no contest, no ambiguity. Gina held nothing but her late husband's 19%, which she'd inherited fair and square, and which, against my 54, was a rowboat against a tide. But I didn't want to just win. I wanted it clean, and I wanted it witnessed, and I wanted every person that woman had lied to see the truth land in the same second. So we were patient. Paula sent one boring, unremarkable letter to the corporate secretary requesting, as a shareholder of record, the date and agenda of the next scheduled meeting. Under Arizona law and Evercrest's own bylaws, that request could not be refused. The corporate secretary was a man named Sylvia's replacement. Gina had fired Sylvia in June. A nervous 26-year-old named Dev, who did exactly what the bylaws required and put us on the notice list without ever mentioning it upstairs. Because why would he? I was just a name. Then came the conscience witness, and I did not go looking for him. He came to me. Ray Mercado had been Evercrest's controller for 22 years. He was 58, drove a truck older than mine, and had loved my grandfather like a father. Ray called me on a Thursday night in June, and I could hear his kitchen TV in the background, some baseball game, the Diamondbacks losing. "Delia," he said, "I don't know what you know, but I've been signing off on things this year I don't like signing. That company was your grandfather's promise, and I keep thinking about him." He stopped. "I've got copies, board minutes. The severance she offered you, she ran it through the company as a consulting reserve, which she is not allowed to do. Laurel's expenses, all of it. If it's ever useful, you tell me where to bring it." I told him to bring it to Paula and to tell no one, and to keep coming to work exactly as he had. He did. He brought 14 months of the truth in a banker's box, and then he went back to his desk and signed the daily payables like nothing had changed. And I have never in my life admired anyone more. Meanwhile, the system was firmly, comfortably on Gina's side. And I need you to see that because it's the part people forget. She had the CEO chair, the reshaped board, 2 Denver law firms, the Range Rover, the office, the letterhead. Every outward sign said the company was hers. When she filed the updated corporate officers with the state, no one blinked. When she told the plant managers I had walked away with a settlement, they believed her, because why wouldn't they? The world assumes the person sitting in the big chair got there honestly. That assumption was her whole strategy. It was also, in the end, the thing that broke her, because she'd built everything on the belief that no one would ever check the ledger. We checked the ledger. The next scheduled shareholder meeting was set for the last Tuesday in July, 7 a.m., at the Evercrest headquarters in a business park off the 101 outside Phoenix. Gina had moved it to dawn on purpose, I later realized, so it would be quick and sparse and over before anyone woke up. She wanted to ram through a resolution, a formal reorganization renaming the holding company Vance Ashford Group, installing Laurel as president, and authorizing a new class of shares that would have diluted the old ownership into vapor. She had the votes, she thought, 19% and a friendly board, enough to pass anything if the only other person in the room was furniture. I called Paula the night before. We went over it one more time. The certificate, the trust, the ledger, Ray's box, the notice of record, everything perfect. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove up to Prescott, opened the safe deposit box, and took out stock certificate number 001. I held it under the fluorescent lights of that little bank vault. It was heavy paper, cream-colored, my grandfather's signature at the bottom in fountain pen blue that had never faded. I put it in a plain folder. I filled his green thermos with black coffee because I wasn't going to sleep and because I wanted him with me. I drove down to Phoenix in the dark. By sunrise, I promised myself, this will be finished. One way or the other, Before that lot outside stops being cool, it will be done. The meeting was on the 14th floor. I got there at 6:52. Gina was at the head of the walnut table, the same table from my childhood, the one thing in the room my grandfather had actually built with his hands out of a walnut tree that fell on the Peoria yard in 1978. Laurel sat at the far end. 2 Denver lawyers, gray suits, $400 an hour. Dev, the secretary, sweating. The 5 board members, including 2 I'd never met. Ray Mercado in the corner, in his one good shirt, a banker's box on the floor by his feet where no one thought to look. When I walked in with my thermos and my plain folder, Gina's mouth did something small and satisfied. "Delia," she said, "this is a closed meeting. Shareholders and officers only." She let the word shareholders sit in the air like a slap. "I'm aware," I said. I sat down. I set the green thermos on the walnut, gently, so it wouldn't make a sound. That's when she leaned back and said it. The line at the top of this story, the one I'll carry to my grave. "Let's be clear, Delia. You're not a shareholder. You're a house guest, and house guests don't vote." Laurel laughed her wet little laugh. One of the Denver lawyers smiled at his legal pad. I let the silence stretch. My mother's voice was in my head. "Keep your voice low." "Before the meeting comes to order," I said, "I'd like to place a document into the record. 2, actually." I slid the first across the walnut. "This is a certified copy of the last will and testament of Walter James Ashford, dated March 2011, and the trust it created. You'll want to look at Section 4. I slid the second. "And this is stock certificate number 001, representing 54% of the voting shares of Evercrest Holdings, issued to the Walter J. Ashford Family Trust in 2011, converted, per its own terms, to my sole and direct control on the 9th of May this year, the morning my father died." The room went so quiet I could hear the AC cycle on. Gina's face did not go pale all at once. It went pale in stages from the jaw up, like water leaving a glass. One of the Denver lawyers picked up the certificate. He read it. He read the trust language Paula had flagged in yellow. And then he did the thing that ended it. He set the pages down very carefully, leaned over, and murmured 6 words into Gina's ear that I couldn't hear but didn't need to, because her hand went flat on the walnut to steady herself. "That's not," Gina started. "That can't be current. Thomas owned this company." "Thomas ran this company," I said. "He owned 19%, same as you inherited. Grandpa Walter left the control to me. My father signed as a witness. You can see his signature. It's on the page you're holding." Laurel stood up. "This is obviously forged. This is— Mom, call the—" "Sit down, Laurel," Gina said, and her voice had gone to gravel, because she, unlike her daughter, had spent 30 years in real estate, and she knew a clean title when it was sitting in front of her. Paula spoke then, for the first time, from the doorway where she'd been waiting. "I'm Paula Okonkwo, counsel to the majority shareholder. I drafted the original trust in 2011. It has been reviewed and validated. I'd also point the board to a second matter," she nodded at Ray. Ray put the banker's box on the table. 14 months of board minutes and disbursements, including a $2.2 million payment authorized as a consulting reserve, which the majority shareholder did not approve and which appears to be an unauthorized use of corporate funds to buy out an owner who could not legally be bought out. We'll be asking for a full audit. That was the moment Gina understood it wasn't just that she'd lost the vote. It was that everything she'd done for 14 months was now a document in a box with her signature on it. I stood up. I didn't need to. But I wanted to be on my feet for this. For Walter, for Ruth, for my father, who'd kept the secret for 13 years so I wouldn't have to fight while he was alive. "As holder of 54% of the voting shares," I said, "I'm calling this meeting to order, and I'm exercising my rights. First order of business, the current board is dissolved, effective immediately, as provided in the bylaws. Second, The proposed reorganization is withdrawn. Third, Gina Ashford is removed as chair and interim CEO, and Laurel Vance is removed as vice president of strategic operations, effective now. I turned to the controller. Ray, you're interim CFO until we hire properly. Fourth, an independent audit of all disbursements since May 2023 begins Monday. Nobody laughed now. Dev, the secretary, was writing it all down so fast his pen squeaked. Gina made one last move, the move cowards always make when the mask comes off. She got quiet and reasonable and reached for the thing she thought I still wanted. Delia, sweetheart, we're family. We can find an arrangement that works for everyone. You keep your shares, of course, and I stay on to run operations, and we— No, I said. Just the one word, low. My mother would have been proud of how low. She stared at me, and then, in front of the 2 Denver lawyers and the dissolved board and her own daughter, my elegant, laughing, lily-scented stepmother put her manicured hands over her face, and her shoulders shook, and she cried. Not the grief kind, the other kind. The kind you cry when the trapdoor opens and you finally look down. It was 7:41 in the morning. Through the glass, the sun had just cleared the McDowell Mountains and was coming up gold over the parking lot. It was, in fact, sunrise. I picked up my grandfather's thermos, and I poured myself the last cup of his coffee. And I drank it while she wept, and I felt nothing I'm proud of and nothing I'm ashamed of. I felt clear. The rest is paperwork, and I've told you I'm good at paperwork. The audit found what audits find. Gina had run just under $600,000 of personal spending through Evercrest in 14 months. The office, a lease on a Range Rover, Laurel's phantom expenses, a corporate retreat in Cabo for 4 people. It wasn't enough to send anyone to prison, and I didn't push for that. I pushed for return of the funds, and I got it, dollar for dollar, out of her 19% value in a negotiated buyback. She kept her house in Paradise Valley. It had been my father's, and he'd left it to her, and it was hers, and I never touched it. I am not my stepmother. I take what is mine, and not 1 cent more. Walter taught me that a company is a promise you keep to people who show up. And Gina had stopped showing up the day she started counting my father's death as a business opportunity. Laurel moved to San Diego. I hear she's in marketing. The company is fine, better than fine. I did not become CEO. I'm an architect, and I know the difference between owning a thing and being the right person to run it every day. I made Ray Mercado's promotion permanent for the first year. Then we hired a real operator, a woman named Frances Ibarra, who'd run a bigger aggregate company in Tucson for a decade. And I kept my 54% and my seat as chair of the board. And I show up for the meetings that matter. Evercrest did $41 million in revenue last year and employs 309 people. And every one of their paychecks clears, which is the only number my grandfather ever really cared about. I kept the walnut table. I had the topographical map brought back up from the supply closet and rehung on the wall. I found my grandfather's first business license in the storage cage, the glass cracked corner to corner, and I had it reframed and hung it back above the desk, cracked glass and all, because the crack is part of the story now. 8 months after the meeting, on a warm night in March, I had the people who'd stood by me over to my place near Camelback. The same 1 bedroom, I never moved, the jade plant's still on the sill, and it's 14 years old now. Paula came, and Ray and his wife Marisol, and Francis, and Sylvia, the office manager Gina had fired, whom I'd hired back the first week at a better salary than she'd ever had. We ate green chile enchiladas off mismatched plates and drank a wine that cost $11 because good wine is wasted on me. Ray brought a 6-pack that got warm on the counter, and he drank it warm anyway, and nobody minded. At some point, Paula raised her glass and said, "To the majority shareholder," and everyone laughed and drank. But I raised mine after, and I said the thing I'd been saving. "To the house guest," They went quiet. She said I was a house guest, that house guests don't vote. I looked around at the 6 faces in that little rented room, the people who'd showed up. She was wrong about the vote, but she was right that I was a guest, in the best way she never meant. My grandfather made me a guest in something he built with $4,000 and his hands. My father guarded my seat at the table for 13 years and never said a word so I'd never have to be afraid. My mother handed me the only tool I ever really needed. I lifted the glass a little higher. Keep your voice low and your paperwork perfect. To the people who set the table, I just kept the promise. I did one more thing that spring, and then I'll let you go. I set up a scholarship through the University of Arizona Architecture Program, $50,000 a year in perpetuity, funded by Evercrest, named the Ruth Ashford Award after my mother, the middle school science teacher who taught me the sentence that won a $54 million company back without my ever raising my voice. It goes to first-generation students, the kind who don't inherit tables, the kind who build them. People ask me when they hear the story what it felt like to take it all back, to win. And I tell them the truth, which is that I didn't take much at all. The shares were always mine. I just stopped letting someone pretend otherwise. What I took was small. What I kept was everything. I kept Ray's loyalty and Sylvia's job and Paula's 40 years of friendship. I kept a jade plant and a rented apartment and a Honda with 190,000 miles on it now. I kept a cracked business license and a walnut table and a topographical map of a county my grandfather helped pour into being. And on the shelf above my drafting desk, where I see it every single morning when the light comes up gold over Camelback, I kept a dented green thermos, 41 years old, worn down to steel where an old man's thumb used to sit. Still the best thing anyone in my family ever owned, and the only crown I'll ever need.